Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. Imagine being alone in someone else's home at night. The doors are locked. The windows are shut. You're safe, or so you think. But what if something else is already inside? Today, I'm bringing you 9 real home alone encounters from Kentucky that turned into pure nightmares. These aren't fake stories. Real people lived through this terror. Hit subscribe right now and drop a like. Comment below where you're watching from. I promise you, after today's video, you'll never look at an empty house the same way again. Let's get into it. I was 24 years old, working night security at the Bowling Green Mall and trying to build a streaming channel in my spare time. I'm 29 now, and I haven't streamed a single minute since March of 2019. What happened that spring changed everything about how I see the world, and honestly, I still don't sleep well most nights. Back then, I was living alone in this cramped 7th floor apartment on Russell Street, trying to make ends meet while my mom was going through chemo treatments down in Nashville. The security job paid okay, but her medical bills were eating up everything I made. That's why I started streaming. Figured if I could get a decent following, maybe pull in some donation money, it might help cover what insurance wouldn't. I only had about 847 followers at the time, mostly playing horror games, ironically, since I was already working nights anyway. My setup was pretty basic, just a decent webcam, cheap microphone, and a green screen I'd bought secondhand that I kept forgetting to actually turn on. I'd stream Thursday through Saturday nights, usually from around 11 p.m. to 3 a.m., playing whatever horror game was trending and trying to be entertaining enough that people might throw me a few bucks. The apartment was perfect for it, really. 7th floor meant no foot traffic, thick walls, and my nearest neighbor was this quiet old woman, Mrs. Chen, who never made any noise. March 14th, 2019 was just another Thursday night stream. I remember it exactly because it was the night everything went sideways. I'd settled in around 10:45, fired up Resident Evil 2, and started my usual routine of trying to be funny while getting scared by jump scares. Chat was pretty normal at first, maybe 50 people watching, the usual mix of regular followers and random viewers dropping in and out. Then at 11:47 p.m., everything exploded. The chat started going absolutely crazy with me's. Sages like, "Who's that behind you?" And "Dude, turn around," and "There's someone in your room." I figured it was just people messing with me. Streamers get trolled constantly, and viewers love trying to freak you out during horror games. I laughed it off, made some joke about my neighbor probably getting home from work, and kept playing. But then I noticed my viewer count. It had jumped from around 50 to over 200 in less than a minute, and people were still flooding in. That's when a regular viewer named Kentucky Gamer 95 sent me a Twitch clip he'd just made of my own stream. I clicked on it, and my blood went cold. There, clear as day in 1080p, was an elderly woman in a hospital gown walking slowly past my doorway at exactly 11:46:33. She was touching the wall for support, moving like she was lost or confused. And when I paused the clip and enhanced it, I could see she was wearing a Bowling Green Medical Center wristband. There was even a dark bruise on her hand where an IV had been. The problem was, I lived alone. My door was chain-locked from the inside, and I was on the 7th floor of a building that required a key card to access after 6 p.m. I sat there staring at the clip while chat continued to explode. Part of me wanted to turn around and look, but honestly, I was terrified. I needed the donation money too badly to end the stream, though, so I just kept playing and tried to convince everyone, and myself, that it was probably Mrs. Chen who had somehow gotten confused about which apartment was hers. But then the viewers started getting organized. They were time-stamping every time the woman appeared. 11:52, 11:58, 12:03, 12:09. Always exactly 6 minutes apart. And it seemed like she only showed up when I got donation alerts, like the notification sound was drawing her out. At 12:15 a.m., something happened that made my skin crawl. A viewer in chat says, "Tell her to nod if she needs help," and I figured I'd play along with whatever prank this was. So I said out loud, "Hey, if you need help, just nod toward the camera." She nodded, directly at the camera, while I was looking at my screen and couldn't see her. The chat went insane. People started asking yes or no questions, and somehow this woman was responding to them. Through the questions, we learned she was looking for her son Martin, that she thought it was 1987, and that she didn't seem to understand she was dead. That's when she held up an envelope from my mail pile. An envelope addressed to Martin Webb, apartment 7B, my exact apartment. I called the building manager the next morning, and he confirmed that Martin Webb had lived in 7B from 1987 until February 28, 2019, just 2 weeks before my stream. He'd moved out suddenly, left no forwarding address, just paid his final rent and disappeared. One of my viewers worked at Bowling Green Medical Center and confirmed that Dorothy Webb had died on February 27th, the day before Martin moved out. She'd been asking for her son right up until the end, but he never came to visit. By the weekend, Chad had tracked down Martin on Facebook. He was living in Nashville, posting about being finally free from his burden and partying every night. The video went viral. I gained over 10,000 followers in 3 days, and suddenly I was making more money than I'd ever seen. Dorothy started appearing every single stream, always at 9 p.m. sharp, sitting in the corner like a proud mother watching her son perform. I was pulling in $3,000 a stream from people who wanted to see the ghost grandma, which was enough to cover my mom's treatments, and then some. But the guilt was eating me alive. Dorothy would hold up items during streams, old baby photos of Martin, report cards from the 80s, even her late husband's funeral program from 1986. When I finally worked up the courage to talk to her directly, telling her that Martin was okay and just busy, she cried transparent tears and mouthed, "Thank you," at these. Camera. The chat fell in love with her. People would send super chats with messages like, "We love you, Dorothy," and "You're not alone," and she'd smile and wave at them. It was beautiful and heartbreaking and completely insane. Then on March 29th, everything changed. Dorothy appeared looking agitated, pointing frantically at my door and mouthing, "He's here," over and over again. At 2:47 a.m., 3 loud knocks echoed through my apartment. Dorothy immediately vanished, and chat exploded with warnings and questions. It was Martin, drunk, angry, and demanding I deal with this situation because the viral stream was embarrassing him. He was threatening to call the police, threatening to sue me, when suddenly every light in my apartment started flickering. Martin was thrown backward by some invisible force, hit the hallway wall hard, and ran away screaming. Dorothy reappeared looking satisfied, smoothed down her hospital gown, and went back to her corner. After that night, other tenants started reporting that they could see their own deceased relatives on their phones when they watched my stream from inside the building. The building manager eventually told me the complex had been built on the old Bowling Green Cemetery in the 1960s. They'd moved the headstones but left the bodies. Dorothy started showing me newspapers during streams, always with the same message. "Fire coming. Leave now. March 30th. I thought she was confused, stuck in some loop from decades past. I was making too much money to pay attention to warnings from a ghost. On March 30th at 3 a.m., an electrical fire started in the basement. I'd fallen asleep at my desk while streaming, but Dorothy shook me awake. Actually, physically shook me. She led me to the maintenance stairs I didn't even know existed, away from the smoke-filled main stairwell that everyone else was using. 7 people died in that fire. I was the only survivor from the 7th floor. The news called it a miracle. Dorothy appeared one last time during my final stream. She held up a handwritten sign that said, "Protected you, like Martin never let me," and faded away forever. I gave all the donation money to the families of the fire victims and quit streaming completely. Now I work as a fire safety inspector, and sometimes, when I'm checking buildings for code violations, I see Dorothy in the smoke detectors and exit signs, still trying to warn people about dangers they can't see. I never went back to that apartment building. They tore it down 6 months later. I was 27 when I realized someone had been cooking elaborate meals in my apartment while I slept, and when I figured out who it was, I understood why some people just disappear without telling anyone. I worked the overnight shift at the Kroger on Euclid Avenue in Lexington, stocking shelves from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent and let me sleep through the day when my apartment building was quiet. I had blackout curtains that turned my bedroom into a cave, and I'd sleep solid from about 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. My roommate Sarah was a traveling nurse who'd been working COVID units down in Louisville for months, so I pretty much had the place to myself. The first time I noticed something was off was June 3rd, 2021. I woke up around noon to use the bathroom, and the whole apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic. Rich, warm cooking smells that made my stomach growl. I figured it was coming through the vents from one of the neighbors. These old buildings in Lexington, you smell everyone's dinner whether you want to or not. I went back to sleep thinking someone was having a fancy lunch. But when I got up for real that afternoon, I opened my fridge to grab some leftover pizza, and sitting there on the middle shelf was this beautiful plate of what looked like coq au vin, tender chicken in wine sauce with little pearl onions and mushrooms covered in plastic wrap with a note that said, "Enjoy, S." I figured Sarah had made it before her shift and left it for me. She'd done stuff like that before. The next few days, it kept happening. I'd wake up to incredible smells, and there'd be these gourmet leftovers in my fridge. Beef Wellington, creme brulee and little ramekins, 7-layer dip that was better than anything I'd ever made, all with little notes signed S. When Sarah finally called me that weekend, I thanked her for all the cooking. There was this Lowe's, and pause. "Jen, I haven't been home in 2 weeks. I'm staying at the hospital residence hall." I felt my blood go cold. But the food, the notes. What food? I started paying closer attention after that. My groceries were restocking themselves. I'd buy a gallon of milk, use half of it, and the next day it would be full again. Fresh vegetables would appear in my crisper drawer. Fancy stuff I never bought, like baby spinach and those little multicolored carrots. My pantry had ingredients I'd never seen before: saffron, truffle oil, real vanilla beans. Then I found the recipe cards. They were handwritten in Spanish in this careful, old-fashioned script, the kind of writing you see from people who learn to write with fountain pens. The recipes were for all the dishes that had been appearing in my fridge. But what made my hands shake was that they were written in my grandmother's handwriting. The same careful loops and crosses I remembered from birthday cards when I was little. My abuela had been dead for 6 years. I started noticing other things. My copper pans, the ones I'd gotten as a housewarming gift but never used because I lived on microwave dinners, had scorch marks on the bottom. My knife set had been professionally sharpened. There were fresh cuts in my wooden cutting board that I'd never made. On July 15th, I decided to stay awake and see what was happening. I pretended to be asleep, lying in my bed with the door cracked just enough to hear the kitchen. Around 2 p.m., I heard the front door open. Not a break-in. The sound of someone using a key. Footsteps in the kitchen. Cabinets opening and closing. Pans clattering softly. And then, humming. Someone was humming Guantanamera, the same song my grandmother used to hum while she cooked. I crept to my bedroom door and peered out toward the kitchen. There was a man in there, wearing a Kroger uniform shirt, just like mine. He was chopping vegetables with my good knife, and he had my work tablet propped up against the coffee maker, using my employee login to look at something. It was Nathan from the produce section. Nathan was this quiet guy who worked nights like me, maybe early 30s, always polite when our paths crossed. He'd help me stock the ethnic foods aisle sometimes, and he'd always ask me about my grandmother's recipes when he saw me buying ingredients for Mexican food. I thought he was just being friendly. I watched him cook for 20 minutes, moving around my kitchen like he'd done it 1,000 times before. He knew where everything was. He seasoned the food, tasted it, adjusted it. When he was done, he plated it beautifully and put it in the fridge with one of those little notes. After he left, I found his hiding spot. Behind the flour canister, there was a composition notebook. 3 years of entries about me, my work schedule, what time I got home, what I ate when I was sick, when I was stressed, when my period was. Day 847. Jennifer mentioned she misses her grandmother's mole, found recipe online, practiced 6 times until it was perfect. Day 921. Jennifer looked tired today, made her comfort food, Arroz con pollo like her abuela used to make. Day 1003. She dropped her keys in aisle 7, got a wax impression, had copy made at Walmart on Richardson Road. He'd been doing this for almost 3 years. I kept reading. Nathan had accessed my employee file and knew my social security number, my emergency contacts, my mother's address in Ohio. He knew I was allergic to shellfish and that I cried during Pixar movies. He knew when I'd broken up with my last boyfriend and when I'd gotten promoted to shift supervisor. The meals were getting more elaborate. 7 courses last week, with wine pairings. He'd printed menus on cardstock with both our names at the top like we were dining together. At the very back of the notebook, wrapped in tissue paper, was a diamond ring. The receipt showed he'd spent $3,000 at Kay Jewelers. He was planning to propose on my birthday. I borrowed a nanny cam from my sister and set it up in the kitchen. The footage I got still makes me sick. Nathan would arrive in full chef whites, like he was working at some fancy restaurant. He'd set up my grandmother's photo, the one from my living room, and practice proposal speeches while he cooked. 3 more months until she realizes we're meant to be, just like her grandparents who met at 17 and stayed together 60 years. He knew more about my family history than I did. On July 20th at exactly 2:15 p.m., I walked into the kitchen while he was cooking. "Nathan, what are you doing?" He didn't even look surprised, just smiled and kept stirring the sauce. "Making your favorite. Sit down, it's almost ready. We need to talk about our future." I backed toward the door. "I'm calling the police." "You haven't eaten yet. You need your strength for tonight's shift." I stepped outside to call 911 and Nathan followed me with a plate of food. "Officer, please," I told the dispatcher, but Nathan was right behind me saying, "She needs to eat, she's too thin, she works too hard." When Officer Mitchell arrived, he knew Nathan. Apparently his sister had filed a similar report the year before, but she'd dropped the charges and moved away. "Family issues," the officer said. They arrested Nathan and found my apartment key in his pocket, along with my grandmother's jewelry that I'd thought was stolen months ago, and printed photos he'd taken inside my bedroom while I slept. The Kroger manager admitted Nathan had been using his security access to watch me on the store cameras. He'd even tracked my phone location through the employee app. Nathan's mother paid his $5,000 bail, and he was out the same day. That evening he texted me, "Dinner's in your fridge. Eat at 5 p.m. for best flavor profile." I changed my locks and I installed security cameras. But the next morning there was fresh bread on my counter with a note. "You need better security. I'm concerned about your safety." The police said it was a civil matter, since he wasn't technically threatening me. Nathan had befriended the maintenance man and gotten a master key to the building. When I started packing to move, Nathan appeared at my door. "I bought the unit next door. We can knock down the wall, make it bigger for us." That's when he opened Jenny's Kitchen. It's a restaurant in the bottom floor of my building. Every dish on the menu is something he cooked for me. He uses my photo in the advertisements and tells food bloggers that the recipes are his girlfriend's family traditions passed down through generations. The health department found no violations. Nathan has all his permits, passes every inspection. Food critics rave about the authentic abuela's cooking and the romantic story behind the restaurant. When I tried to get a restraining order, the judge said cooking wasn't threatening behavior. Nathan's lawyer argued it was traditional courting behavior and that I should be grateful to have such a devoted boyfriend. Nathan owns my building now. When I got a job at the Meijer across town, he opened a food truck in their parking lot. When I moved to a new apartment, he bought the building there too. He follows me to job interviews and tells potential employers we're engaged. He's opened 3 more restaurants around Lexington, all called Jenny's Kitchen, all using my grandmother's recipes. I can't escape him because legally, he's not doing anything wrong. He's not threatening me. He's just cooking. Everyone thinks I'm lucky to have such a devoted boyfriend who remembers my family traditions and makes me beautiful meals. The worst part is that the food is incredible. Nathan actually learned to cook better than my grandmother ever did. Jenny's Kitchen has a 6-month waiting list, and food bloggers drive from Louisville just to eat there. I don't sleep during the day anymore. I can't trust that I'm alone, even with new locks and cameras. I work days now at a grocery store in Frankfurt, 30 miles away, but Nathan texts me the menu for that night's dinner service every morning at 8 a.m. Last week, the Lexington Herald-Leader ran a feature about Nathan's inspirational love story and his plans to open a Jenny's Kitchen in every city where I've ever lived. I haven't eaten home cooking in over a year. I'm 25 and work the evening shift at Target in Paducah, Kentucky. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills while I figure out how to get back into nursing school. Money's been tight since my student loans got messed up, so when my Aunt Beverly asked if I'd house-sit her place on Jefferson Street for 2 weeks in August 2018, I jumped at the chance. She was paying me $500 plus groceries, which was more than I made in a week scanning barcodes and dealing with customers who think I personally control corporate policy. The house itself was this massive Victorian from 1888, all gingerbread trim and bay windows, sitting on the National Register of Historic Places. Aunt Beverly inherited it from my grandmother, and honestly, I could never figure out why she didn't just live there herself. It was gorgeous, way nicer than her little ranch house across town. She always said the place was too much house for one person and paid someone to stay there year-round. I figured it was just one of those rich people things I didn't understand. Beverly handed me the keys on August 7th, along with a typed list of instructions. Water the plants, check the mail, keep the curtains closed in the front parlor. Normal house-sitting stuff. But then she grabbed my arm at the door, her fingers digging in harder than necessary. "Ashley, honey, this is important," she said, and her voice had this edge I'd never heard before. "No matter what you hear after 11:45 p.m., you stay in your bedroom. Lock the door if it makes you feel better, but do not come downstairs. Do you understand me?" I laughed it off. "What, is the place haunted or something?" She didn't laugh back. "Just promise me. Please." The first night was exactly what you'd expect in a big old house. Every board creaked, the radiators clanked, and the wind made the windows rattle in their frames. I set up in the guest bedroom on the second floor, or binge-watched Netflix on my laptop and was asleep by 11. Easy money. But the second night, that's when things got weird. I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard footsteps downstairs. Not just one person, but what sounded like dozens of people walking around the first floor. Heavy boots, high heels, bare feet on hardwood. The sound of a crowd milling around, voices murmuring in what I swear were languages that didn't exist. The words had too many consonants, syllables that bent in directions that hurt to hear. I grabbed my phone to call the police, thinking someone had broken in, but I had no signal. 0 bars, which was impossible because I'd been texting friends all evening. The Wi-Fi was down too. I crept to the bedroom door and pressed my ear against it, listening. The voices got louder, more organized. Someone was speaking with authority, like they were running a meeting or giving a presentation. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was familiar. Call and response, question and answer, an auction. I know I should have stayed put like Aunt Beverly said, but curiosity has always been my weakness. I unlocked the door as quietly as possible and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The parlor was directly below, and through the banister spindles, I could see movement. The room was full of people, but they were all wrong. Translucent, like old photographs come to life. Men in Civil War uniforms, women in Victorian dresses, a few in what looked like medieval robes. Some weren't people at all, geometric shapes that moved with purpose, things made of light and shadow that hurt to look at directly. At the front of the room stood the auctioneer. He was tall, wearing a perfectly pressed Victorian suit, but where his face should have been was just void. Empty space that seemed to pull light into it. When he spoke, the words came out in all languages at on. See, but somehow I understood every syllable. Lot number 3846, he announced. Grandfather clock, circa 1924, existing simultaneously across 17 dimensions. Do I hear an opening bid? I looked where he was pointing and saw our family's grandfather clock, the one that had been in the parlor when I arrived. But it wasn't just there. It was also not there. I could see through it to the wall behind, but also see it solid and real, and somehow see other versions of it in what my brain kept insisting were impossible directions. The bidding started. Voices called out prices that made no sense. 40 years of summer rain. One childhood memory of Christmas morning. The weight of 7 sorrows. A thing made entirely of geometric angles that folded in on themselves raised what might have been an appendage. 7 memories of summer, it said in a voice like breaking glass. Sold, declared the auctioneer. The clock didn't disappear. It folded away, into angles that shouldn't exist, like reality had origami joints I'd never noticed before. I was so focused on trying to understand what I was seeing that I almost missed the next lot. Photos. Family photos from the mantel, including several of me from last Christmas. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was seeing the auction list in the auctioneer's hands, names written in flowing script, my grandmother's name, my great-uncle's name, relatives I'd never met. Some had "sold collection pending" written next to them in red ink. That's when I understood. This wasn't just an auction. It was a harvest. I tried to back away from the stairs, but my foot hit a loose board. The squeak echoed through the house like a gunshot. Every head in that room turned toward me, even the ones that didn't have heads in any conventional sense. The auctioneer smiled with a mouth I couldn't see. Ah, perfect timing. Lot number 3847. I ran back to the bedroom and slammed the door, but I could still hear him clearly through the walls. Ashley Davis, 25 years old, minimal damage, prime breeding age. Do I hear an opening bid? The voices exploded in a bidding frenzy. 40 years of dreams, called one. 100 heartbeats, called another. Her weight in shadows, offered a third. I pressed my back against the door, but I could feel it getting warm, like something was burning through from the other side. My phone was still dead. The window looked out over a 30-foot drop onto concrete. Through the chaos of voices, one stood out. Clear, familiar, heartbroken. Ashley, honey, listen to me. My grandmother's voice, though she'd been dead for 5 years. You can bid on yourself. It's a family loophole, but you have to do it now. How do I? Just speak up, loud and clear, quickly. I heard the auctioneer considering a bid. 1,000 days of sunshine from a dying star, quite generous for such a young specimen. I took a deep breath and screamed at the top of my lungs. I bid my entire bloodline's freedom for myself. The house went dead silent. Then footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, measured, wrong. The auctioneer appeared at my door, somehow standing in the hallway despite the door being closed. Up close, I could see that his suit was made of fabric that moved like liquid darkness, and where his face should have been was a space that contained distant stars. Interesting, he said, and his voice was the sound of civilization's ending. That is, unprecedented, but not invalid. The rules were written in the cosmos before your Earth existed, little one. Your family is bound by a debt. What debt? I never agreed to anything. Your great-great-grandfather, 1888. He sold your family's service for a fortune in gold. Every generation pays. Some are taken, some serve as witnesses. The house has operated every night since then. I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. What happens if I don't agree? Your family line ends tonight, not just you, everyone. Your cousins, your aunt, Evie, and the children not yet born, all forfeit. I thought about Aunt Beverly, about my little cousin Emma, who just started kindergarten. What if I serve? 100 years as witness to the auctions. You may never leave the property, but you will live, and your family will continue. Choose now. I signed my name in a book that felt like it was made of frozen fire, the pen burning cold against my fingers. The moment I finished the last letter of my signature, everything changed. I could see all the dimensions now, layering over each other like sheets of glass. I watched the rest of that night's auction, concepts being sold, pieces of people's lives changing hands, alternate versions of reality being bartered away. I saw myself in 3 different lots, one where I'd become a successful doctor, one where I was homeless and addicted, one where I'd never been born at all. The next morning I tried to leave for work, but I couldn't cross the property line. My body became transparent, and pain shot through every nerve until I stepped back onto the porch. The house had claimed me. When Aunt Beverly returned 2 weeks later, she wasn't surprised to find me still there. "Grandmother served 40 years, she said quietly. "Mom served 20. I thought I'd escaped by moving away, but I should have known they'd find another way. I'm sorry, honey. I've been here 7 years now. My bank account receives $10,000 every month from an untraceable source. Payment for my service, I guess. Friends and family visit sometimes, but they never stay long. They say I look translucent, and the house makes them feel uneasy. Every night at midnight, I watch the auction. I've learned to predict which items will be valuable, and I try to warn families subtly when I can. Sometimes I save someone. Most times, I can't. I've discovered that every missing person case in Paducah for the past century was actually someone sold through the house. They're alive, just living in other dimensions now. The mayor knows. The police chief knows. Half the prominent families in town either provide inventory or buy it. I've tried recording the auctions for proof, but cameras only show an empty room. The beings exist beyond anything technology can capture. The worst part isn't the isolation or the trapped feeling. It's knowing what I am now. I've become inventory myself. When my 100 years are up, I'll be lot number something or other, auctioned off to the next witness. The cycle continues forever. Sometimes when I'm working the day shift at stores around town, because I can work, just never leave the property overnight, I try to warn people. Don't house-sit Victorian houses, I'll say while bagging their groceries. They always laugh and think I'm just making conversation. They never understand until it's too late. To this day, I can hear the auctioneer's voice every night at 11:45 calling the lots to order. And I know that somewhere out there, another family member is getting a phone call about easy money for house sitting. I just hope they listen better than I did. I was 23, delivering pizzas for Papa John's in Elizabethtown when I took what I thought was the easiest gig of my life. Professor Williams from the university offered me $1,000 to house-sit his place on Woodland Drive for 10 days while his family visited Switzerland over Christmas break. I was working part-time at community college, trying to save up for transmission repairs on my beat-up Honda, so $1,000 for basically just sleeping in someone else's house seemed like a no-brainer. I should have known something was off when he handed me 3 full pages of instructions for what was supposed to be simple house-sitting. But I needed that money bad, and honestly, rich professors do weird stuff all the time, right? The house was this massive 2-story colonial thing with a circular driveway and one of those fancy security systems with cameras everywhere. Professor Williams walked me through everything on December 12th before his flight: how to set the alarm, which lights to leave on, where the spare keys were hidden. But what stuck out was how obsessed he was with the basement. He called it a panic room, said it was converted from an old storm shelter, and that's where he kept important documents and valuables. The door was this heavy steel thing with locks on the outside, and he made me promise to check it twice a day to make sure it stayed secured. "Very important, David," he kept saying, adjusting his glasses nervously. "The basement door must remain locked at all times. If you hear any sounds from down there, it's just the old heating system. Don't investigate. Just check the locks and move on." I figured he was just paranoid about his stuff getting stolen. Rich people get weird about their collections and documents, especially professors with all their research. The whole family seemed normal enough. His wife was polite, asked me to water the plants, tie, Pakal stuff. They showed me photos of their son Michael, who was supposedly studying abroad at Oxford. Proud parents showing off their successful kid, you know. The first night went smooth. I followed every instruction to the letter, set the alarm, checked all the locks, including that basement door, and settled in to watch Netflix on their massive TV. Around 11 p.m., I thought I heard what sounded like a television coming from somewhere in the house, but it was muffled and distant. I figured it was probably the neighbors. These big houses are close together and sound carries weird sometimes. But the second day, things started feeling off. I woke up and found a basket of laundry in the hallway that definitely wasn't there the night before. Fresh laundry, men's clothes, size medium. Professor Williams was easily an XL, and I hadn't done any washing. I stood there staring at these clothes, trying to make sense of it. Maybe his wife had done a load before leaving and forgotten to mention it. But the clothes looked lived in, not like they'd been sitting in a basket for days. That evening, I made myself a large pizza. One of the perks of working at Papa John's was bringing home the mistakes and extras. I ate maybe 3 slices and left the rest on the counter before going to bed. When I woke up the next morning, half the pizza was gone. Now, I don't drink, never have, so I couldn't blame it on drunk munchies. I started wondering if maybe I'd eaten more than I remembered. But I've got a pretty good memory about food. The bathroom incident really freaked me out. I always put the toilet seat down. It's just a habit from living with my mom and sister growing up. But I walked into the guest bathroom and found it up. Plus, there was a damp towel hanging on the rack that I definitely hadn't used. I stood there staring at that wet towel, feeling this cold creep up my spine. He had been in this house. Someone was still in this house. I checked the security footage on the system Professor Williams had shown me. Most of the cameras covered the outside and main rooms, but there was one angle that caught part of the basement stairs. At 3:17 a.m., I saw a figure moving up from the basement. Just a shadow, really, face turned away from the camera. My hands were shaking as I rewound it and watched again. Someone was coming out of that locked panic room. That night I set my phone to record audio and left it on the kitchen counter. In the morning I played it back and nearly dropped the phone. Around 2 a.m., clear as day, I heard a young man's voice saying, "Please help me. They'll be back soon." The voice was coming from downstairs. I spent the whole day pacing, trying to figure out what to do. Call the police? But what would I say? That I heard voices and found some laundry? They'd think I was losing it. Plus, Professor Williams had made such a big deal about not disturbing anything in the basement. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was trapped down there. That evening, I examined the basement door more carefully. The locks were on the outside, yeah, but when I looked close, I could see tiny scratch marks around the mechanisms. Someone had been picking these locks from the inside. My heart was hammering as I turned the key and opened that heavy door. What I found down there made my legs nearly give out. It wasn't just a storage room. It was a fully furnished apartment. There was a bed, a small kitchen area, a desk with textbooks, even a bathroom. Someone was living down here. Someone had been living down here for a long time. At 2 a.m., I was sitting in the living room, unable to sleep, when I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. I froze, watching the doorway, and this young guy appeared, maybe early 20s, thin, pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in months. He looked terrified when he saw me. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't tell them you saw me." It was Michael, Professor Williams' son, the one who was said to be studying at Oxford. He sat down across from me, hands shaking, and told me the truth. His parents had locked him in that basement 2 years ago after he had a mental breakdown during his senior year of high school. He'd been valedictorian, had a full scholarship to MIT, but the pressure got to him, and he had what his parents called an episode. They were embarrassed. A professor's son having mental health problems, that didn't fit their perfect family image, so they made up the Oxford story. They hired someone to create fake social media posts, even had an actor do video calls pretending to be Michael for relatives. Meanwhile, the real Michael was trapped in their basement, being forced to take antipsychotic medications crushed into his food to keep him docile. They told the town he was studying abroad, and everyone bought it. "I only come up when they're gone," he whispered. "I don't understand how the world works anymore. I've been down there so long I'm scared of everything now." He showed me his college degree, a real one, earned online while imprisoned in his own house. His parents made him keep studying to maintain the lie. But what good was a degree he could never use? The worst part was when he showed me notes hidden in the air vents, notes from previous house-sitters. "Don't help him," one read. "They have connections. The police chief is his uncle. Just do your job and leave." I started researching and found out it was true. Professor Williams' brother was the police chief. The hospital director was a family friend. Half the town was either related to them or owed them favors. They'd created this perfect system to hide their son away. Michael played me recordings on a hidden phone he'd managed to get. his parents discussing a permanent solution. They were planning to ship him to some private facility in Mexico after Christmas, basically a PR liaison where he'd disappear forever. I agreed to help him escape. The plan was simple. I'd unlock everything and leave the house for a few hours, claim I had a pizza emergency at work. When I came back, he'd be gone, and I'd act like I had no idea what happened. But when I got to work, I realized the house had hidden cameras everywhere, cameras I hadn't seen. Professor Williams was probably watching from Switzerland, seeing everything. I had to think fast. I created a real emergency, told my manager I'd left a pizza in the oven at the house I was sitting and had to run back before it burned the place down. I rushed back and accidentally knocked out the internet router, killing the camera feeds. Then I unlocked everything and left again. When I returned 2 hours later, the basement was empty. There was blood on the doorframe where Michael had scraped his arm rushing out, but he was gone. Free. The Williams family came back that same night. Professor Williams was furious, threatening my life if I ever spoke about what I'd seen. His wife offered me $10,000 to keep quiet. When I refused, the police chief showed up and filed a false report saying Michael had attacked me during a break-in and fled. They forced me to sign it. A month later, I got a postcard from California. No return address, just safe, free, thank you, starting over. M. But my life in Elizabethtown was over. Professor Williams got me fired from Papa John's, sabotaged my college enrollment, spread rumors that I was unstable. The whole town turned against me. I had to leave. I live in Louisville now, work at a homeless shelter helping people with mental illness that society has thrown away. I think about Michael sometimes, hoping he's really free, really starting over. But I also think about that house on Woodland Drive. I heard they hired a new house sitter last year, and that person mysteriously moved away after just 1 week. The basement door is sealed now, permanently locked. I saved one life, but I can't shake the feeling that there might be others. Other families with perfect reputations, hiding dark secrets. Other Michaels locked away in basements, attics, back rooms. Invisible victims of people too proud to admit their children aren't perfect. I don't drive through Elizabethtown anymore. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder who else is trapped out there, waiting for someone brave enough to unlock their door. I was 24 when I took that job, house-sitting my cousin Sarah's trailer up on Black Mountain Road in Harlan County. She was heading to rehab down in Lexington for a month, and honestly, I needed the money. I'd been working at the Dollar General in town, trying to save up for my accounting classes online, and the idea of free rent plus $200 just for keeping an eye on her place seemed like easy money. The trailer sat way back in the holler, about 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by old coal mining land that had been abandoned since the 50s. Sarah warned me the Wi-Fi was spotty and I'd probably get bored, but I figured that was perfect. Nothing but peace and quiet to study. This was back in March of 2021, and I remember thinking the worst part would be the isolation. I loaded up my Honda with groceries, my laptop, and enough ramen to last a month. The drive up Black Mountain Road was rougher than I expected, potholes everywhere and tree branches scraping the roof of my car. When I finally got to Sarah's place, it looked decent enough. Small aluminum-sided trailer with a little wooden porch, painted white but starting to peel. The key was under the flower pot like she said, and inside everything was clean and organized. Sarah might have had her problems, but she kept a tidy house. That first night went exactly like I hoped. I set up my laptop on the kitchen table, made some ramen, and studied until around midnight. The silence was incredible. No traffic, no neighbors, just the occasional owl or something rustling in the woods. I slept better than I had in months. When I woke up the next morning, I actually felt optimistic about the whole arrangement. That feeling lasted about 5 minutes. I walked out to get something from my car and stopped dead on the porch. 7 smooth river stones were stacked perfectly in a little tower right by the front door, with a piece of bark balanced on top. Someone had scratched TM into the bark. My initials, Tommy Morrison. I stood there staring at it, trying to figure out how anyone could have known I was there. Sarah said she hadn't told anyone except her mom that someone would be staying at the place. I figured it had to be local kids. Word travels fast in small towns, and if they knew Sarah was gone, maybe they thought it would be funny to mess with whoever was house-sitting. I knocked the stones over and went to work, but it bothered me all day. When I got back that evening, I checked all around the trailer and didn't see any tire tracks or footprints. The ground was still soft from recent rain, so you'd think there would be something. Day 3 is when things started feeling really wrong. I was walking to my car that morning when I noticed the complete silence. Not just quiet, I mean absolute silence, like someone had pressed a mute button on the entire forest. No birds, no insects, no wind through the leaves. Nothing. I stopped walking and just listened, and the only sound was my own heartbeat in my ears. Then the air changed. It got thick, almost heavy, and my ears started popping like I was driving up a mountain. I could taste metal, like I'd been sucking on pennies, and my nose started bleeding for no reason. I tilted my head back to stop it, and that's when the smell hit me. It was sharp and chemical, like battery acid mixed with something sweet and rotten. The smell was coming from the tree line, and it was strong enough to make my eyes water. I grabbed some tissues from my car and got out of there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me drive away. When I came back that evening, I found red cloth strips tied to trees all around the trailer. Dozens of them, fluttering in the breeze like little flags. They hadn't been there that morning. I was sure of it. The fabric looked old and sun-faded, like it had been hanging there for years, but that was impossible. I walked the perimeter and counted 43 strips, all tied at exactly the same height. That night, I noticed the handprints on the windows. Greasy smudges pressed against the glass from outside, but they were wrong. Only 4 fingers each, and the joints were in the wrong places. Whoever made them had to be at least 7 feet tall, because some of the prints were way up near the top of the windows. I tried to wipe them off from inside, but they were on the exterior glass, and I wasn't about to go outside in the dark to clean them. The power went out around 9 p.m. The generator Sarah told me about wouldn't start. My phone was dead, even though I'd charged it that afternoon, and my laptop wouldn't turn on. I was completely cut off from the world. I sat in the dark with a flashlight, listening to the silence, until I heard the footsteps. Something was walking in a circle around the trailer. Slow, heavy steps, like someone wearing boots that were too big. The walking was accompanied by breathing, wet and labored, like someone with severe asthma. It made a complete circle clockwise, then started again. 3 knocks on the aluminum siding. Pause. 3 more knocks. It went on for hours. Around midnight, I worked up the courage to look out the window. At the edge of the tree line, I could see a pale figure standing perfectly still. Even in the darkness, its skin seemed to glow with this sickly gray light. It was wearing what looked like old mining clothes from the 1950s, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be, and the head was tilted at an angle that would break a normal person's neck. As I watched, more figures emerged from what looked like an old mine entrance I hadn't noticed before. All pale, all wrong, all standing at the tree line staring at the trailer. I counted at least a dozen before I couldn't look anymore. "Tommy, come here, baby." My mother's voice, clear as day, calling from somewhere outside. But my mom lives in Florida, and besides, something was off about the voice. The pitch was right, but the rhythm was wrong, like someone doing a poor imitation. I stayed away from the windows after that, but I could hear them moving around outside. They seemed to be studying the trailer, testing the windows and doors, but not trying to break in. When I moved from room to room, I could hear them following me along the outside walls, their heads tilting in unison when I changed direction. In the morning, I found bones arranged in arrow shapes pointing away from the trailer. Deer bones, I think, picked clean and arranged deliberately. Whether it was a warning or a threat, I couldn't tell. I was digging through Sarah's kitchen drawers, looking for batteries, when I found an old newspaper clipping. 7 miners trapped in Black Mountain collapse, 1952. The article said they were never recovered, presumed dead when the tunnel caved in. I read it 3 times before the significance hit me. They weren't ghosts. Ghosts don't leave handprints or arrange bones. These were something else, something that had been changed by decades underground. That second night, I left a sandwich outside to see what would happen. In the morning, I found it completely dissected. Each layer separated and laid out in a perfect line. Bread, mayo, turkey, lettuce, bread. Not eaten, just studied, like they were trying to understand what human food was supposed to be. I found more evidence of previous tenants in a hidden crawl space under the trailer. Dozens of driver's licenses and ID cards, all from the last 10 years. I looked up some of the names online and found missing person reports. Their cars had been found abandoned along Black Mountain Road, but the people were never located. Their belongings were still in the trailer when the next tenant arrived. Eddies, on my last night there, they tried to get inside. I could hear them pressing against the windows, the aluminum siding buckling under their weight. The doorknob started turning from the tube. Outside, slowly, and I heard the lock mechanism snap. The door opened and one of them squeezed through the frame. It was too tall for the doorway, had to bend almost in half to fit. The smell of deep earth and decay filled the room. I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe properly. It approached with those impossible long arms dragging on the floor, reached out, and touched my forehead with one gray finger. Suddenly, I could see what they saw. Endless tunnels stretching deep into the mountain, hundreds more of them waiting in the darkness, all hungry for the surface world, all wrong in ways I couldn't understand. They'd been down there so long, they'd forgotten how to be human, adapted to something else entirely. I screamed, and the thing jerked back like it had been burned. All the sounds outside stopped at once. It retreated through the door, and I heard them all moving away into the forest. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car. They didn't chase me, just stood at the tree line watching as I drove away, like they were letting me go. Sarah came back 2 months later to find the trailer empty. She called me furious, demanding to know where all her stuff went. I never told her what happened, just said I had a family emergency and had to leave early. She went missing about 2 months after that. Her car was found on Black Mountain Road, keys still in the ignition, but they never found her body. The trailer's still empty. Locals know to avoid Black Mountain Road after dark, though nobody talks about why. Sometimes I drive by during the day, and I can see those red cloth strips still tied to the trees, faded and torn but still fluttering in the breeze. I finished my accounting degree and moved to Louisville, but I still have nightmares about those tunnels. Sometimes I wake up tasting metal and smelling battery acid, and I know they're still down there, waiting for the next person who needs a quiet place to stay. I'm 29 now, and I work 2 jobs just to keep my head above water. Day shift at a call center and weekends cleaning office buildings downtown. But back when I was 26, I was pulling night shifts at McDonald's in London, Kentucky, trying to save up enough money to hire an immigration lawyer. My name's Maria, and honestly, I never thought I'd end up telling anyone this story. But what happened that September still messes with my sleep. I'd been working at that McDonald's for about 8 months when Mrs. Patterson, this sweet old lady who lived next door to my apartment, fell and broke her hip. She was maybe 80, lived alone in this old farmhouse her family had owned since the 1940s, and she needed someone to feed her 3 cats while she was stuck in the hospital. The house was out on Laurel Lake Road, maybe 15 minutes from town, and she offered me $200 a week just to drive out there twice a day and make sure her cats had food and water. For someone making minimum wage and trying to save every penny for legal fees, that was like winning the lottery. The house was exactly what you'd picture when someone says old Kentucky farmhouse. White paint peeling off the wood siding, wraparound porch with a swing that creaked even when there wasn't any wind, and this massive oak tree in the front yard that had to be older than the house itself. Mrs. Patterson had given me a key and walked me through everything before her surgery. Feed the cats, check the mail, water her plants. Simple enough. The only weird thing was this trap door in the kitchen floor that led down to what she called the root cellar. Had a heavy padlock on it, and she specifically told me not to worry about it. Just leave that be, she said, which honestly was fine by me. I wasn't looking to explore some creepy basement. The first night went smooth. The cats, Smokey, Patches, and this fat orange tabby called Biscuit, were friendly enough, ate their food, and pretty much left me alone while I watched Netflix on her old TV. I drove back to my apartment around midnight feeling pretty good about the easiest $200 I'd ever make. Night 2 was when things started feeling off. I showed up around 8 p.m. like usual, but the cats were nowhere to be found. I called for them, shook the food bag, checked all their usual spots, but nothing. Finally found all 3 of them crammed under Mrs. Patterson's bed, and let me tell you, getting 3 terrified cats out from under a bed is not easy. Their eyes were huge, pupils dilated like they'd seen something that scared them half to death. They wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink, just huddled together in the corner of the living room staring at the kitchen. That's when I noticed the smell, kind of sweet, but in a way that made your stomach turn. Like fruit that had been sitting in the sun too long, mixed with something metallic. It was strongest near the kitchen, and it seemed to get worse as the night went on. I figured maybe something had died in the walls. Old houses, you know. But it was that copper smell underneath the sweetness that really bothered me. Reminded me of when I used to help my uncle butcher chickens back home. By night 3, the smell was so bad I had to breathe through my mouth. And that's when I saw the padlock on the floor next to the cellar door. Just sitting there, broken clean in half. The door itself was cracked open maybe an inch. And there were these wet handprints around the edges. I counted them twice because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 7 fingers on one hand, 6 on the other. And they were still damp. I should have left right then. I know that now. But I needed that money, and honestly, I kept trying to talk myself into logical explanations. Maybe Mrs. Patterson had family who came by. Maybe they're waiting. There's some kind of maintenance issue she forgot to mention, so I got my phone and shined the flashlight down into the cellar. The walls were covered in scratch marks, fresh ones like something had been clawing its way down into the darkness. They were too deep to be from any animal I could think of, gouged right into the stone like whatever made them had serious strength. And the smell coming up from down there was so strong it made my eyes water. That's when I heard it. Wet, chewing sounds echoing up from the darkness. Something was feeding down there. The sound stopped the second my phone light hit the bottom of the stairs, but I could hear movement, like something large shifting around, trying to stay out of the light. I slammed that door shut and put a chair on top of it, but I didn't sleep much that night. When I came back the next morning to feed the cats, I found small animal bones arranged in a perfect spiral pattern right next to the cellar door. They were picked completely clean and still wet with saliva. But the bones weren't the worst part. There was this trail leading from the cellar to the back door, like someone had dragged something wet across the floor. It was iridescent, kind of like snail slime, but wide enough for a person. I followed it outside and found it led all the way to Mrs. Patterson's compost pile, which had been completely torn apart. Everything that had been rotting in there was gone. Mr. Johnson, who lived on the other side of Mrs. Patterson's property, stopped by that afternoon while I was there. Said someone had been stealing his chickens. 3 of them gone in 2 nights, and all he found were the feet, lined up neat as you please by his back gate. He asked if I'd seen anything strange. I told him no, but I was starting to think Mrs. Patterson's property had some kind of animal problem. That night, I set up my phone to record the kitchen while I tried to get some sleep on her couch. Figured if something was getting in, I'd have proof. But when I checked the footage the next morning, the file was corrupted. Just 8 hours. Morning, I found a gift waiting for me. Mr. Johnson's missing dog's collar, covered in that same iridescent slime. I tried communicating with it, left a note asking what it wanted, found my answer written in saliva on the bathroom mirror. Warm meat. I bought cheap steaks from the grocery store and left them in the cellar. It worked for 2 nights, but then it wanted more. And I was starting to understand it didn't want animal meat anymore. It wanted something that could run, something that could be afraid. It wanted human. On my last night there, it broke through the bedroom door. I heard the wood splinter and didn't wait to see what came through. I jumped out the window, ran to my car, and peeled out of there doing about 60 on that gravel road. In my rearview mirror, I could see it standing in the middle of the road, memorizing my car. Mrs. Patterson came home 3 days later. When I told her what happened, she wasn't surprised. Said it was a family curse, that several old families in the area took turns house-sitting to keep the thing fed and contained. She apologized for not warning me, but said most people wouldn't believe it anyway. I moved to Ohio 6 months later. Figured putting a state line between me and that thing would be enough. But sometimes I find slime trails outside my apartment building. It remembered my scent, and I'm starting to think no matter how far I run, it's going to find me again. I still send Mrs. Patterson money sometimes, hoping she'll use it to buy meat for that cellar. Because if she doesn't keep it fed, I have a feeling I know who it's going to come looking for next. I was 28 when my brother Jake deployed to Afghanistan for his second tour. He asked me to house sit his place on Elkhorn Lake while he was gone, and honestly, I jumped at the chance. I'd been driving forklift at the Pikeville Coal Depot for 3 years, making just enough to cover rent on my crappy apartment downtown. Free housing for 8 months? That was a blessing I couldn't pass up. Jake had bought the place as a foreclosure the year before. A ranch-style house built back in 1971, sitting on about 2 acres of wooded land. It needed work, but it was solid. Or at least that's what I thought. The first thing Jake told me when he handed over the keys was that the previous owners had some kind of pest problem. 5 families in 10 years, he said, shaking his head. All of them claimed infestation, but the exterminators never found anything. Probably just didn't want to deal with the isolation. The house sat about a quarter-mile back from the main road, surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. Jake figured people just got spooked living out there alone. I didn't mind the quiet. After my divorce the year before, I was actually looking forward to it. The scratching started my 3rd night there. I was lying in bed around midnight when I heard it, this soft, rhythmic scraping sound coming from inside the walls. My first thought was mice. Old house, plenty of places for them to get in. I got up and walked around, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the sound seemed to move with me. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved to the kitchen, it followed. I figured it was just the acoustics playing tricks on me. The next morning, I bought a dozen mousetraps and set them along the baseboards in every room. That night, the scratching came back, louder this time. In the morning, every trap was still set. Not even the bait was touched. By the end of the first week, I realized the scratching wasn't random. It followed me from room to room, always staying just inside the walls wherever I was. When I sat down to watch TV, it would start up behind the living room wall. When I went to bed, it moved to the bedroom. And when I pressed my ear against the drywall to listen closer, I could swear I heard something else underneath the scratching. A slow, deliberate breathing. That's when I started noticing other things. Black mold around all the ventilation grates, which wasn't unusual for an old house. But there were also these strange white fibers clinging to the vents, thick and sticky like spider silk. The water stain on my bedroom ceiling seemed to be getting bigger each day, and sometimes it would drip this clear, viscous fluid that had no smell but left a slick residue on everything it touched. Jake's cat, Smokey, disappeared on my 10th day there. I found his collar 3 days later when I was changing the air filter in the hallway. It was sitting inside the ductwork, covered in that same clear slime. I called Jake overseas to tell him, but the connection was terrible, and I didn't want to worry him about a missing cat when he had bigger problems to deal with. That's when I decided to investigate. I unscrewed the vent cover in the hallway and shined my phone's flashlight into the ductwork. The beam only penetrated a few feet before hitting a bend, but in that brief moment, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Eyes. Multiple pairs, reflecting the light like an animal's, but wrong somehow. Too large, too close together. The second my light hit them, they retreated deeper into the darkness with a sound like fingernails on metal. The scratching got worse after that. Something heavy was moving through the ceiling at night, making the support beams creak and dropping bits of insulation through the cracks around the light fixture. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room, but it didn't matter. Whatever was up there seemed to know exactly where I was at all times. 2 weeks in, the electrical problems started. Lights flickering, outlets shorting out randomly. I called an electrician and he found chewed wires throughout the house, but the tooth marks were too big for rodents and the bite pattern was all wrong. Never seen anything like it, he said, shaking his head. Looks almost human, but the spacing's off. The bathroom incident happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in the shower when one of the ceiling tiles suddenly crashed down into the tub. I looked up through the opening and caught a glimpse of pale flesh pulling back into the darkness above. Too quick to see clearly, but definitely not human. The skin was gray-white and seemed to stretch wrong, like it was covering something with joints that bent in directions they shouldn't. That night, I set up my old laptop with the webcam pointing at the attic access panel. The footage I captured made me sick to watch. Around 3 a.m., the panel lifted and something dropped down into the hallway. It looked humanoid but wrong in every possible way. Impossibly thin, with limbs that were too long and joints that bent backward. Its skin was pale as paper, and when it turned toward the camera, I could see multiple sets of eyes reflecting in the darkness. I found the shed skin the next morning. It was in the corner of the attic, crumpled up like a discarded shirt but clearly human-shaped. Except it had extra joints along the arms and legs, and the fingers had too many segments. The material felt like wet leather and smelled like copper pennies. The thing started raiding my refrigerator at night. I'd wake up to find packages of raw hamburger torn open from the inside. The meat gone, but the plastic containers left behind. It was coming through the vents, I realized. The ductwork connected every room in the house, and whatever was living in the walls had been using it as a highway system. On my 20th night there, I woke up to pipets. The sound of breathing directly above my bed. I looked up and saw that one of the ceiling tiles had been lifted slightly, creating a gap just wide enough for something to peer through. Multiple eyes were watching me from that crack, unblinking, studying me like I was some kind of specimen. I left a note on the kitchen counter that night. "What are you?" In the morning, I found my answer scratched into the drywall next to the refrigerator. "Hungry, always hungry." That's when I decided to do some research. At the Pikeville Library, I found records showing that Jake's house had been built on the ruins of an old TB sanitarium from the early 1900s. Dozens of patients had died there and been buried in unmarked graves around the property. Every family that had lived in the house since 1971 had reported the same problems I was experiencing. One family's 3-year-old daughter had disappeared in 1987. They found her remains in the walls 3 weeks later, partially eaten. I started leaving raw hamburger in the attic, thinking maybe I could keep it satisfied. It worked for a few days, but then it wanted more. 2 pounds, then 3, then 5. And I found more shed skins, each one larger than the last. Whatever was up there was growing, getting stronger from the feeding. That's when I realized there wasn't just one. The scratching was coming from different areas of the house simultaneously. At least 3 of them were living in the space between the walls and ceiling, maybe more. I found their nest in the far corner of the attic, a twisted structure made from insulation, old clothes, bones, and yellowed newspaper from 1971. They'd been there since the house was built, maybe longer. The worst part was hearing the babies. High-pitched crying sounds coming from inside the walls, like newborns but wrong somehow. They were breeding in there, raising new generations in the dark paces between my world and theirs. Everything came to a head on my 28th night. I was watching TV when the entire living room ceiling collapsed. 3 pale things fell through the opening and immediately scrambled back up the walls faster than my eyes could track. But I got a clear look at them for the first time. Humanoid, but stretched and twisted like someone had taken a person and pulled them through a funnel. Gray skin, no hair, mouths that opened too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. The next night, one of them dropped down into the hallway and stood upright. It was easily 7 feet tall, but thin as a scarecrow, its head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human's neck. When it spoke, its voice sounded like gravel being poured down a metal chute. "You leave this ours now." I understood then. They'd been here since before the house was built, living in the ground, in the bones of the old sanitarium. The house was their territory, and humans were just temporary invaders. Every family that had tried to live there had been driven out, or worse. I told them I'd leave if they let me pack my things. They agreed, watching me from holes in the ceiling as I threw my clothes into garbage bags. I could feel their eyes on me the entire time, evaluating, deciding whether to honor the agreement or just finish what they'd started. I called Jake from my truck, trying to explain what had happened, but he thought I was having some kind of breakdown, PTSD from the divorce maybe, or just cabin fever from living alone. He told me to get help and hung up. 2 months later, Jake came home on emergency leave. He lasted exactly 2 nights in that house before calling me to apologize. "You were right," he said. "I don't know what they are, but you were right." The house sits empty now. The thing is, it's spreading. Neighbors have started reporting scratching in their walls, and I think whatever's in Jake's house is using the connected crawl spaces to move through the whole neighborhood. The county health department condemned the entire street last month, claiming structural damage, but I know the real reason. I drive by there sometimes just to check. The house is still standing, but you can see pale faces in the windows now. They've taken it over completely, and they're waiting for the next family to move in. Makes me wonder how many other houses in Kentucky have the same problem, and how long those things have really been here, living in the dark spaces between our world and theirs. To this day, I can't sleep in a room without checking the ceiling tiles first. I'm 32 and work maintenance for the Mammoth Cave Tourism Department. Been doing it for about 6 years now. Last November, I needed some extra cash after my truck broke down. So when Pastor Williams asked if I'd house-sit his cabin on Mammoth Cave Road for 2 weeks, I jumped at it. Easy money, he said. Just keep an eye on things while he visited family in Tennessee. My daughter stays with her mom most of the time anyway since the divorce, so being alone in the woods didn't bother me. I've always preferred quiet places over crowds. The cabin was built back in the 1940s, nothing fancy but solid. Pastor Williams walked me through everything, where the fuse box was, how to work the wood stove, basic stuff. Then he showed me the basement door with its heavy chain and padlock. Natural cave entrance, he explained. Previous owner used it for cold storage, but it's not safe anymore. Don't go down there. Don't remove that chain. And if you hear anything from below, just ignore it. Old caves make weird sounds. He handed me a spray bottle of bleach and told me to spray around the doorframe once a week. Keeps the mold down, he said, but something in his voice made me think he wasn't telling me everything. The first 3 nights were normal. I'd get home from work around 6, heat up dinner, watch TV, go to bed. The cabin was quiet except for normal settling sounds and wind in the trees. I was starting to think this was the easiest job I'd ever had. Then Pastor Williams called on the 4th day to check in, and I mentioned how peaceful it was. "You haven't heard anything from the basement?" he asked, and I could hear concern in his voice. "No, should I have?" Long pause. "Just keep that door locked, okay? And don't forget the bleach." That night I heard the first sounds. Around 2 a.m., something was moving around down there. Not scratching or clawing. Deliberate movement. Not like someone walking around. I figured maybe it was just water dripping or air currents, but it went on for almost an hour. Footsteps. Definitely footsteps. The next morning, I checked the basement door. The chain was still locked tight, but the metal looked scratched, like something had been testing it from the other side. Fresh scratches, deep gouges in the steel. I called Pastor Williams, but it went straight to voicemail. That's when I started paying attention to details I'd missed before. There was a chest freezer in the basement corner that I'd assumed was just storage. Inside, I found packages of meat, steaks, whole chickens, ground beef, all labeled with dates going back months. Some of it was fresh, some starting to turn. Taped to the inside of the lid was a handwritten note. Every 3 days, never miss feeding time. It gets angry when hungry. I stared at that note for a long time, my hands shaking. Feeding time? What the hell was Pastor Williams not telling me? That night, the sounds started earlier. Around midnight, I heard something big moving around down there, and then it started climbing stairs. Heavy, deliberate steps getting closer to the door. The chain rattled as something tested it, then pushed against the door hard enough to make the frame creak. I sat in the kitchen with a baseball bat, listening to whatever was down there trying to get out. Then it spoke. Hungry. The voice was wrong. Too deep, with weird echoes like it was coming from a throat that wasn't built for human speech. Feed me. Please feed me. I didn't sleep that night, or the next one. By the third day, I was exhausted and starting to think I was losing my mind. Maybe the isolation was getting to me. Maybe I was hearing things. But when I went to the basement to do laundry, the scratches on that door were deeper, and there were more of them. The meat in the freezer was G1. All of it. Every package vanished overnight. The freezer was completely empty except for a new note, written in different handwriting. Thank you. Please don't stop. It's been so long since someone fed me properly. I called Pastor Williams again, and this time he answered. When I told him about the missing meat and the voices, he was quiet for a long time. I should have told you, he finally said. The previous owner, he took care of something down there. When he died, it got hungry. I've been trying to figure out what to do. What kind of something? I don't know. He never told me exactly. Just said it had been down there since before he built the house, and if he stopped feeding it, bad things happened. What kind of bad things? Missing pets. Livestock killed in ways that didn't make sense. People reported feeling watched in the woods. One family moved away after their daughter started sleepwalking toward the cave entrance in the middle of the night. I hung up and drove to town, bought every package of meat the grocery store had. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was scared and sleep-deprived and just wanted the sounds to stop. When I got back to the cabin, I opened the basement door for the first time. The stairs went down maybe 20 feet, carved right into the limestone. At the bottom was a natural cave chamber, and sitting in the middle of it was something that used to be human. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, but hunched over like its spine had grown wrong. Its skin was pale and stretched tight over bones that stuck out at weird angles. What little hair it had left hung in gray strings around a face that was almost normal except for the eyes. They were completely black, no whites at all, and too big for the skull. When it saw me, it smiled, showing teeth that were all different sizes and shapes, like they'd been replaced randomly over the years. Thank you for coming down, it said in that wrong voice. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. I dropped the grocery bags and ran, made it to my truck and drove straight back to, can't remember being anything else. The man who built this house found me when I was dying and brought me down here to heal. I never healed right, never became human again. But I remember enough to know I don't want to hurt people. Feeding me helps me stay civilized. When Pastor Williams came back, I told him everything. He wasn't surprised, just tired. The old owner left me instructions, he said. In his will, he made me promise to take care of it. What is it? He thought maybe it was someone who got lost in the cave system decades ago and changed. Something about the limestone, the minerals, the isolation. He found old clothes down there, rotted away, but human clothes. I left Kentucky the next day and never went back. But sometimes, late at night, I think about that thing in the basement. Still down there, still hungry, still trying to be polite, while slowly forgetting how to be human. I wonder if Pastor Williams found someone else to feed it, or if it's getting hungry enough to come looking for food again. Last month, I saw a news story about missing hikers near Mammoth Cave. 3 people in 2 weeks all disappeared without a trace. The article mentioned strange sounds coming from the cave system at night and local residents reporting an unusual smell in the woods, like something dead that won't quite finish rotting. I think about calling Pastor Williams to ask if everything's okay at the cabin, but honestly, I'm afraid of what he might tell me. Some things are better left buried in the dark, even when they're still moving around down there, writing notes and trying to remember what it felt like to be human. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night thinking I can hear that voice. Hungry. Please feed me. I don't want to hurt anyone. And I wonder how long something can stay civilized when it's slowly starving to death in the dark, 20 feet. It's below where normal people live their normal lives. I still live in Kentucky, just not anywhere near Cave City. But the state's full of limestone caves, and sometimes when I'm working maintenance in remote areas, I find myself looking for basement doors with heavy chains. wondering how many other things are down there, getting hungry, trying to stay polite while they slowly forget how to be anything other than what they've become. The scariest part isn't that it was some kind of monster. The scariest part is that it was still trying to be human. My name's Sarah Chen, and I was 19 when this happened, back in February of 2023. I was house-sitting for my professor's family while they took a week-long ski trip to Colorado. Dr. Martinez taught my psychology class at Eastern Kentucky University, and when he found out I was struggling to make rent, he offered me $200 to watch their place in Richmond. Seemed like easy money. Their house sat on about 5 acres outside town. One of those modern log cabin styles with big windows facing the woods, beautiful during the day, different story at night. The first 3 nights went fine. I'd make dinner, do homework, binge Netflix. The house had this amazing surround sound system, so I'd usually have something playing, true crime podcasts, music, whatever. Kept the place from feeling too quiet. But on Thursday night, I noticed something weird. I was in the kitchen around 9 p.m. making a sandwich when I heard what sounded like someone walking on the back deck. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone was pacing back and forth. I turned off the music and listened carefully. The footsteps stopped. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the sliding glass door that led to the deck. Turned on the porch light and looked out. Nothing there. But here's the thing. There were wet footprints on the deck boards even though it hadn't rained in 3 days. Fresh prints, still glistening. Size 12 boots, maybe bigger. I called Dr. Martinez, thinking maybe he'd forgotten to mention a groundskeeper or something. He seemed confused and said no one should be on the property. Probably just a raccoon, he said. They get on the deck sometimes looking for food, but those weren't raccoon prints. Friday night, it happened again. Same time, same slow pacing. This time I was ready. I had my phone recording as I crept to the back door. The footsteps were definitely human, and they were right. Outside the kitchen window, I could see a shadow moving past the glass, tall and thin. When I turned on the lights, it stopped immediately. The footprints were there again. But this time, they led from the woods to the deck, around the entire house, and back to the woods. Like someone had been doing a slow patrol of the property. And in the mud near the tree line, I found something that made my blood freeze. Cigarette butts. Fresh ones. Someone had been standing in those woods, smoking and watching the house. I didn't sleep much that night. Kept the lights on, kept checking the windows. Around 3 a.m., I heard something that wasn't footsteps. It was tapping. Gentle, rhythmic tapping on glass. I followed the sound to the living room, where the big picture window faced the front yard. There was someone standing just outside the circle of light from the porch lamp. Tall figure in dark clothes, completely motionless except for one finger, tapping slowly on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I fumbled for my phone to call 911, and when I looked back up, they were gone. The police came out Saturday morning and found the cigarette butts, the footprints, everything I'd described. The deputy, a guy named Officer Hayes, took it seriously but said they couldn't do much without actually catching someone on the property. He suggested I might want to stay somewhere else for the rest of the week. But here's where I made my mistake. I was young and stubborn, and I needed that $200. Plus, nothing had actually happened, right? No one had tried to break in or hurt me, just some creep trying to scare the college girl. I decided to stick it out. Saturday night, I set up my laptop to record the back deck. If this guy came back, I'd have video evidence. I made sure all the doors were locked, closed all the curtains, and settled in to wait. Around 10 p.m., the pacing started again. This time I stayed in the living room and watched my laptop screen. The motion sensor had triggered the camera, and I could see a figure walking slowly back and forth across the deck. But something was wrong with the image. The person was too tall, maybe 7 feet, and their limbs seemed too long for their body. The way they moved was strange too, like they were floating just slightly above the deck boards. I was staring at the screen so intently that I almost missed the sound behind me. Gentle knocking on the front door. 3 soft knocks, then silence, then 3 more. My heart was hammering as I crept to the front window and peeked through the curtains. There was someone standing on the front porch, but they had their back to the door, just standing there, facing the yard, like they were waiting for something. In the porch light, I could see they were wearing a dark coat and jeans. Normal enough, except their head was tilted at an angle that didn't look right. Too far to one side, like their neck was broken. The knocking came again. 3 gentle knocks. But the person on the porch hadn't moved. Their arms were hanging at their sides. That's when I realized there were 2 of them. I backed away from the window and checked my laptop. The figure on the back deck was still pacing, but now they'd stopped and were facing the camera. Even in the grainy night vision, I could see they were looking directly at me through the lens, and they were smiling. The knocking continued, front door, back door, alternating every few minutes. I called 911, whispering into the phone that there were intruders on the property. The dispatcher said units were on the way, but it would be at least 15 minutes. 15 minutes felt like forever. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find in the kitchen and hid in the downstairs bathroom, the only room in the house without windows. The knocking stopped, and for a few minutes, everything was quiet. Then I heard something that made me want to scream. The sound of a key in the front door lock. Slow, careful, like someone was trying not to make noise. The door opened with a soft creak, and I heard footsteps in the foyer. Soft-soled shoes on hardwood. The footsteps moved through the house methodically. Living room, kitchen, dining room, like they knew the layout. I was pressed against the bathroom door, knife in my hand, trying not to breathe too loudly. The footsteps stopped right outside the bathroom. I could see the shadow of feet blocking the light under the door. Then came the worst sound I've ever heard in my life. Scratching. Long fingernails scraping slowly down the outside of the door from top to bottom. Over and over again. The police sirens saved me. As soon as the intruders heard them coming up the driveway, the scratching stopped. I heard rapid footsteps, the front door slamming, and then silence. When the cops got there, the house was empty, but the evidence was everywhere. Muddy footprints tracked through the living room and kitchen, deep scratches gouged into the bathroom door, and on the kitchen counter, something that made Officer Hayes call for backup immediately. A Polaroid photo of me sleeping in the guest bedroom, taken from inside the room. The timestamp showed it was from the night before. Friday night, when I thought I was alone. They'd been inside the house before. They had a key, and they'd been watching me sleep. The investigation turned up some disturbing facts. The house had been broken into twice in the past year while the Martinez family was out of town. Nothing was ever stolen, but both times, personal photos had been rearranged and moved around. Dr. Martinez had never mentioned it because he thought it was just kids playing pranks. But the police found something else when they processed the scene. In the guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping, they discovered a small hole drilled through the wall near the ceiling. It led to the attic space above, where someone had set up what looked like a surveillance post. Blankets, food wrappers, a bucket for waste. Someone had been living up there, watching through that hole, coming and going through an access panel on the roof. The forensics team estimated the setup had been there for months, maybe longer. Whoever was doing this had been watching the Martinez family, learning their routines, their schedules. They knew when the family would be away, and they knew I'd be there alone. They never caught him, or them. We still don't know if it was one person or more. The surveillance equipment was gone by the time police searched the attic the next day, removed through that roof access while we were all busy processing the scene downstairs. I moved back in with my roommate that week and never house sat for anyone again. Dr. Martinez was horrified and paid for me to stay in a hotel for the rest of the semester until I felt safe. But the thing that really gets to me is this. I keep thinking about that photo of me sleeping. How long had they been taking pictures? What else did they do while I was unconscious and vulnerable? The Martinez family installed a full security system and moved out 6 months later. They couldn't handle living in a house where someone had been watching their children sleep. I don't blame them. I'm 21 now, and I still check my ceilings whenever I move somewhere new. I look for holes, for access panels, for any sign that someone might be watching from above. Because the worst part about this whole experience isn't what happened. It's knowing that it's probably still happening to someone else. Somewhere in Kentucky, there's another college girl house-sitting alone, and she has no idea that someone is living in the walls, watching her sleep, waiting for the right moment to come down and introduce themselves. The police told me that home invasion cases like this are more common than people think. Stalkers who study their victims for months, learning every detail of their lives before making contact. They said I was lucky, that the police sirens scared them off before they could do whatever they'd been planning. But I don't feel lucky. I feel like prey that got away this time, but only barely. And sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate pacing. And I wonder if they found me again. I'm 25 years old, and this happened to me last summer when I was house-sitting for my cousin's family in Lexington. My name's Marcus, and I work as a line cook at a restaurant downtown, but things were tight financially. So when my cousin Beth offered me $50 a day to watch their house while they visited her in-laws in Florida for 2 weeks, I couldn't turn it down. The house was nice, a 2-story colonial in one of the older neighborhoods near UK campus. Built in the 1940s, Beth told me, with a finished basement that her husband used as an office. She gave me the full tour before they left, how to work the thermostat, where they kept the spare keys, which neighbor to call if there was an emergency. Standard stuff. Only thing is, she said as we were standing in the kitchen, sometimes the house makes weird noises at night. Old pipes, you know. Don't let it freak you out. I'd been staying there for 3 days when I first heard what she was talking about. Around midnight on Wednesday, I was watching TV in the living room when I heard this rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere below me. Thump, thump, thump. Like someone bouncing a basketball, but muffled. It went on for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped. Old houses make strange sounds. I grew up in one. Pipes expanding and contracting, wooden beams settling, mice in the walls. I didn't think much of it. But Thursday night, the thumping was different. More irregular, and it seemed to be moving around down there, like someone walking back and forth across the basement floor. I muted the TV and listened carefully. The sound would start in one corner, move across the room, then back again. Definitely footsteps. I found the basement door in the kitchen and flicked on the light switch. The wooden stairs creaked as I went down, and I called out, "Hello? Anyone down here?" Felt stupid doing it, but better safe than sorry. The basement was exactly like Beth had shown me. Paneled walls, carpeted floor, her husband's desk and computer in one corner, some storage boxes along the walls, nothing out of place. But the air felt different somehow, warmer than it should have been, and there was a smell I couldn't identify. Not bad exactly, just lived in. I was about to head back upstairs when I noticed something weird. There was a sleeping bag rolled up behind the water heater, tucked back in a corner where you wouldn't see it unless you were looking for it. Next to it was a plastic bag with what looked like food containers inside. My first thought was that Beth's teenage son had been sneaking friends over to hang out. Kids do stupid stuff like that. But when I unrolled the sleeping bag to get a better look, my stomach dropped. It wasn't some kid's camping gear. This was an adult-sized military surplus sleeping bag, worn and dirty, like it had been used regularly. And the smell was stronger now. Unwashed human body mixed with something else I couldn't place. I called Beth immediately. "There's someone living in your basement," I told her. "What? Marcus, that's impossible. No one has a key except family." "I'm looking at a sleeping bag and food containers right now. Someone's been staying down here." There was a long pause. "Are you sure it's not just old camping stuff from when David was in Boy Scouts?" "Beth, this stuff is fresh. The sleeping bag is still warm." She told me to call the police, which I did. 2 officers came out and searched the basement thoroughly. They found more evidence. Empty food cans, a portable camping stove, bottles of water. Someone had been living down there for weeks, maybe months, but no sign of forced entry, no broken windows or damaged locks. Any idea how they're getting in?" Officer Rodriguez asked. That's when we found it. Behind a panel of fake wood paneling that had been carefully loosened, there was an old coal chute that led from the basement to the outside of the house. It had been sealed up decades ago, but someone had reopened it. You could crawl through it if you were determined enough, and it would put you right in the basement without ever going near the main entrances. The police said they'd patrol the area more frequently, but there wasn't much else they could do until they caught someone actually trespassing. They advised me to stay somewhere else for the rest of the house-sitting period. But here's the thing. I needed that money. 7 more days at $50 a day was $350, which would cover my rent for the month. I couldn't afford to walk away, so I stayed. But I moved a heavy bookshelf in front of the coal chute entrance and started sleeping on the couch in the living room instead of the guest bedroom upstairs. If someone tried to get in, I'd hear them. Friday night was quiet, Saturday too. I started thinking maybe whoever had been staying there had moved on, scared off by the police visit. But Sunday night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of someone trying to move that bookshelf. Scraping, grinding noises from the basement. Someone was down there, pushing against the shelf I'd used to block the coal chute. I grabbed my phone and crept to the top of the basement stairs. The sound stopped when the old wooden steps creaked under my weight. "I know you're down there," I called out. "The police are on their way." I wasn't actually calling the police yet. I wanted to see what would happen first. The basement was completely silent for maybe 5 minutes. Then I heard a voice. Quiet, hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in a long time. "I just need a place to sleep." It was a man's voice, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. He sounded tired, more than threatening, but that didn't make me feel any safer. "You can't stay here," I said. "This isn't your house." "I know. I'm sorry. I'll leave tomorrow, I promise. Just let me stay tonight. It's cold out there." Part of me felt bad for the guy. It was July, so it wasn't actually cold, but I could hear something desperate in his voice. Still, I wasn't about to let some stranger live in my cousin's basement. "I'm calling the police now," I said, and I meant it this time. "Wait." His voice was closer now, like he'd moved to the bottom of the stairs. "Please, I'm not going to hurt anyone. I've been staying here for 3 months, and I never bothered the family. They never even knew I was here." That made it worse, not better. The idea that this guy had been living under my cousin's house while her kids were sleeping upstairs made my skin crawl. I called 911 and stayed on the line while I waited for the cops to arrive. The dispatcher told me to go outside and wait in my car, but I wanted to make sure this guy didn't escape through the coal chute again. I sat at the top of the basement stairs, listening. I could hear him moving around down there, gathering his things. And then he started talking to himself, not loudly, just muttering under his breath. I couldn't make out most of it, but I caught a few words that made my blood run cold. "Pretty girl, sleeping upstairs, watched her through the window." He was talking about Beth's daughter, my cousin's 16-year-old daughter, whose bedroom was on the 2nd floor. The police got there before he could leave. They found him trying to squeeze through the coal chute with a backpack full of his belongings. Turned out to be a 47-year-old man named Robert Kemp, who'd been homeless for about a year after losing his job and apartment. He had no criminal record, which was probably why he'd been able to stay hidden for so long. But when they searched his backpack, they found things that made this case much more serious. Photos. Dozens of them, taken with a telephoto lens through the windows of the house. Pictures of Beth's family eating dinner, watching TV, getting ready for bed. Pictures of her daughter in her bedroom, changing clothes, doing homework, and a notebook. Pages and pages of observations about the family's daily routines. What time they woke up, when they left for work and school, what they watched on TV, what they ate for dinner. He'd been studying them like a scientist, learning everything about their lives. The worst part was the section about Beth's daughter. He'd written detailed descriptions of her appearance, her friends, her schedule. He knew what time she got home from school, which window was her bedroom, when she took showers. He'd been planning something, building up to some kind of contact. Kemp was arrested and charged with criminal trespassing, stalking, and possession of child pornography. Some of the photos of Beth's daughter qualified, apparently. The prosecutor said he'd probably get 2 to 5 years, assuming he took a plea deal. Beth and her family moved out of that house a month later. Couldn't stand the thought of living somewhere that had been violated like that. The idea that their most private moments had been watched and documented by a stranger was too much to handle. What gets to me is how long it had been going on. 3 months. 90 days of this guy living 20 feet below that little girl's bedroom, watching her through the windows, taking pictures, planning God knows what. If I hadn't agreed to house sit that week, if the police hadn't found him when they did, what would have happened? I still think about that sometimes. How many other houses in Lexington have someone living in the basement or the attic or the crawl space? How many families think those weird noises at night are just old pipes settling, when really it's someone moving around in the spaces between the walls? The detective who worked the case told me that situations like this are more common than people realize. Frogging, they call it. People secretly living in other people's homes without them knowing. Usually it's just someone desperate for shelter, but sometimes it's predatory behavior like what we'd uncovered. I don't house sit anymore. Can't do it. Every weird sound, every shadow, every feeling that someone's watching, it all takes me back to that basement, listening to Robert Kemp muttering about my cousin's daughter while he packed up his stalker kit. And I always wonder, when he was down there at night, listening to the family moving around upstairs, what was he thinking? Was he planning to introduce himself eventually? Was he waiting for the right moment to come upstairs while everyone was sleeping? The police never found out because Kemp never talked, took his plea deal and went to prison without explaining what his endgame was. Sometimes I think that's for the best. Some things are too disturbing to know. I was 20 when this happened, working as a night shift nurse at a care facility in Bowling Green while I finished my degree at WKU. The pay was decent, and I needed the money, so when Mrs. Patterson, one of my regular patients, asked if I'd stay at her house for a long weekend while her daughter took her to Louisville for medical appointments, I said yes. She offered me $300 for 4 days, which was more than I made in a week at the care facility. Mrs. Patterson lived alone in a ranch-style house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by farmland. Nice and quiet, she said. Perfect for studying. The house was comfortable but dated, built in the 1970s with big picture windows in every room and sliding glass doors that led to a back patio. Her daughter Michelle walked me through everything before they left Friday morning. How to work the ancient air conditioning, where the important phone numbers were posted, which medications Mrs. Patterson would need when they got back. Only thing is, Michelle said as we stood in the living room, Mom's been having some issues with what she thinks is a prowler. Claims someone's been looking in the windows at night. We think it's just her medication making her paranoid, but humor her if she brings it up, okay? I nodded, but privately I was a little concerned. Mrs. Patterson had always seemed sharp when I worked with her at the facility. If she was seeing things that weren't there, her condition might be deteriorating faster than anyone realized. The first night was uneventful. I made dinner, did some reading for my pharmacology class, watched TV. The house was peaceful, and I slept well in the guest bedroom. But Saturday night, I started to understand what Mrs. Patterson had been talking about. I was sitting at the kitchen table around 10 p.m., working on an assignment, when I heard a soft tapping sound, like someone gently knocking on glass. I looked up from my textbook and listened. The sound came again. Tap, 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 from somewhere near the front of the house. I walked to the living room and checked the big picture window that faced the front yard. Nothing outside but darkness and the single street light at the end of the long driveway. But as I was turning away, I saw something that made me freeze. A handprint on the glass. Low down, like someone had been crouching outside the window and pressed their palm against it. The print was fresh. I could see the oils from fingertips still visible on the surface. I called the police immediately. The deputy who responded, Officer Martinez, was professional but not particularly concerned. He walked around the house with his flashlight, checking for signs of forced entry or evidence of trespassing. Found some scuff marks in the flower bed under the front window, but nothing definitive. Could be kids, he said. Sometimes teenagers mess around in rural areas, especially on weekends. I'll make sut. We patrol this road more frequently, but keep your doors locked and call if you see anything else. Sunday was quiet, but I found myself checking the windows obsessively. Every shadow outside looked like a person, every wind sound like footsteps. I was starting to understand why Mrs. Patterson had been so anxious. Monday night, my last night there, I decided to stay up late and keep watch. If someone was coming around the property, I wanted to catch them in the act. I turned off all the lights in the house and sat in the living room with my phone ready to call 911. Around 1 a.m., I saw him. A man standing at the edge of the tree line behind the house, maybe 50 yards from the sliding glass doors. He was perfectly still, like a statue, just standing there facing the house. I couldn't make out details in the darkness, but I could see his silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. I called 911 and whispered my location to the dispatcher, never taking my eyes off the figure. But by the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, he was gone. They searched the property with flashlights and found fresh footprints in the soft soil near where I'd seen him standing. Size 11 or 12 boots, deep impressions like someone heavy had been standing there for a long time. "How long was he out there?" Officer Martinez asked. "I don't know, I only noticed him at 1 a.m., but he could have been there for hours." The detective they called in, Detective Morrison, took the situation more seriously than I'd expected. She photographed the footprints, measured them, took statements. Turned out there had been similar reports from other rural properties in the area over the past few months. Someone, possibly the same person, had been spotted on security cameras at 3 different farms, always standing motionless at the edge of properties, watching houses for extended periods. "We think it might be the same individual," Detective Morrison told me. "Always late at night, always just watching. Never attempts to enter buildings or take anything, just observes." That was how more disturbing than if he'd been trying to break in. The idea of someone standing in the darkness for hours, studying the house, watching for movement inside. When Mrs. Patterson and Michelle returned Tuesday morning, I told them what had happened. Michelle was skeptical until Detective Morrison showed them the photos of the footprints and explained about the other incidents. "Mom wasn't imagining things," Michelle said quietly. "Someone really has been watching the house." Mrs. Patterson just nodded. "I told you so. He's been coming around for weeks. Always stands in the same spot, just staring at my bedroom window." That detail sent chills down my spine. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, facing the exact spot where I'd seen the figure standing. "How long has this been happening?" Detective Morrison asked. "Started about a month ago. I'd see him maybe twice a week, always after midnight, just standing there like a scarecrow, but I knew he was real because sometimes he'd move, shift his weight, turn his head, but mostly, he just watched." The investigation continued for several weeks. Police increased patrols in the area and set up trail cameras on Mrs. Patterson's property and neighboring farms, but they never caught him. The sightings stopped completely after that Monday night when I'd called 911, like he knew he'd been discovered and decided to move on to somewhere else. Mrs. Patterson installed a security system and motion-activated lights around the house, but the damage was done. She couldn't sleep knowing someone had been standing outside her bedroom window, watching her. 6 months later, she moved to an assisted living facility in town, saying she didn't feel safe in the house anymore. The really disturbing part came out during the investigation. When Detective Morrison reviewed security footage from the other properties, she discovered that the watcher had been following a pattern. He'd appear at one location for several weeks, then disappear and show up at another property miles away. Always rural houses with elderly women living alone. Always standing in positions where he could see into bedrooms. "We think he was selecting targets," Detective Morrison told me when she called with an update. "Studying their routines, learning when they were most vulnerable. We just don't know what he was planning to do with that information." They never caught him. The case went cold after the sightings stopped, though Detective Morrison said they kept it open in case similar incidents were reported elsewhere in Kentucky. But here's what really gets to me. I keep thinking about those weeks when Mrs. Patterson was trying to tell everyone about the prowler, and nobody believed her. How many nights did she lie in bed knowing someone was standing outside her window, watching her sleep, while her family dismissed her concerns as medication-induced paranoia? I'm 22 now, and I work at a hospital in Louisville. Whenever I get elderly patients who complain about prowlers or intruders that their families say aren't real, I listen. I take them seriously. Because sometimes the person everyone thinks is confused or paranoid is the only one seeing the truth. And I never stay alone in rural houses anymore. The idea of all those big windows, all that darkness outside, all those places where someone could stand and watch without being seen, it's too much. I live in an apartment building now, surrounded by other people with security cameras and locked entrances. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if he's still out there. Standing at the edge of someone else's property, watching another elderly woman through her bedroom window, planning something that we'll never understand because we never caught him to ask. The detective said that predators like this escalate over time, that watching eventually isn't enough, and they move on to more direct contact. I just hope that wherever he went after leaving Mrs. Patterson alone, someone was watching back.